in. Okay, we have a lot to get through, so I think I'll just get started here. So we're recording, so we're all good. So good morning. Thanks for signing up and joining us today. We really appreciate your interest and engagement in this study that we've kind of really just started. This is the first stakeholder session for DOER and Mass CEC's new energy storage study, which will examine the state and future of storage in the Commonwealth. I'm Tom Ferguson, Energy Storage Programs Manager at DOER. Today, I'm joined by my colleagues at DOER and Mass CEC, as well as by the consulting firm Energy and Environmental Economics, or E3, who we've hired to lead the analysis for this study. Next slide, please. So here's the agenda, and just kind of upfront, we do ask that you kind of keep yourselves on mute during the presentation portion. We will be having a breakout session at the end, as you can see, where we encourage you to kind of start the conversation with us and start to share your initial thoughts and feedback. By no means is that this is the last time you'll be able to do that. This is really just the beginning. We're really excited to engage with you all summer on this process. So I'm going to kind of start as I am with the study goals, kind of context and logistics, and give an intro, and then E3 is kind of lead the meat of the presentation and looking at kind of initial findings, kind of assumptions and inputs that go into their modeling. Next slide, please. Next slide. So the goals for today are to introduce the new energy storage study, to explain the drivers behind the study. E3 will share initial findings, key assumptions, and inputs that will go into their modeling. And then this fifth, and what I think is kind of the most important point, and this is all meant to kind of start to spur your involvement and your feedback. So again, thank you so much for joining us. Your involvement and feedback is so critical to this. The study is only as good, I feel, as like the amount of perspectives that we're able to capture to make this, as pertinent to the Commonwealth as possible. And this ultimately, the study will feed into potential policy and programmatic recommendations we make. So, we thank you and look forward to continued engagement with you on this study. Next slide, please. For those of you who may not know who DOER and Mass CEC are, just very quickly, so the Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources, or DOER, we're an agency of the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. Our mission is to create a clean, affordable, equitable, and resilient energy future for all residents, including low-income and environmental justice populations, businesses, communities, and institutions in the Commonwealth. In Mass CEC, the Clean Energy Center, they're a state economic development agency that's dedicated to accelerating the growth of the clean energy sector across the Commonwealth, just for job creation, deliver statewide environmental benefits, and to secure long-term economic growth for the people of Massachusetts. CEC's mission is to accelerate the clean energy and climate solution innovation that's critical to meeting Commonwealth's climate goals, advancing Massachusetts' position as an international climate leader while growing the state's clean energy economy. Next slide. So just some goals and background, kind of the way I've been thinking about this study, there's sort of like two overarching goals. The first is to review energy storage deployment in the Commonwealth, essentially since the State of Charge report. And the second is to study the role of storage in a 2050 net zero Commonwealth, particularly the role it can play with resiliency and looking at mid and long duration storage technologies to kind of fill that need. State of Charge report, it's been a while now, published in 2016. This was a groundbreaking report that examined the potential value and use cases of storage in the Commonwealth. There were a lot of key findings in that groundbreaking report, but the one I kind of want to point people to right now is energy storage was found to be able to provide substantial ratepayer, environmental, and system owner benefits that outweigh costs. And here on your right is sort of a classic figure that came out of that report, and it just shows one of the many use cases of storage and in its ability to store off-peak electricity and then discharge it on peak to shave peak. Next slide, please. So fast forward from there about 6 years. to 2022. Back in August, in the 2022 climate bill, particularly in Section 80, the legislature put a requirement of DOER in consultation with Mass CEC to conduct a study on the current status of storage and the potential of mid and long duration energy storage in the Commonwealth. And I think this is really great. You know, it's been 7 years since state of charge, and therefore it's just a lot has happened. A really good time for us to see where we've come since then, and also to really start to plot the path for where we need to go. Related to that, at the end of 2022, the Commonwealth published its Clean Energy and Climate Plan for 2050. And this plan, it lays out how the Commonwealth is going to achieve its goal of net zero in 2050 in an equitable and just manner. Among the many things that the plan calls for is the collective greenhouse gas emission reduction of 85% relative to 1990 levels. For the electric sector, that translates to a 93% reduction. And our decarbonization pathway relies heavily on an expanded role for the electric sector, which including driven by mass adoption of technologies like electric vehicles and heat pumps. This leads to about a 2.5 times increase in electric sector load relative to 2020 and over 50 gigawatts of solar and wind. So storage, therefore, it's going to play a critical role in integrating all of these renewables and helping to meet the CECP's net zero goal. But it obviously raises a lot of questions, like what specific roles will storage play? What kinds of storage do we need, like a mix of short, long, and mid duration? And how do we incentivize this deployment? These are just touching on some of the questions that this study that we're embarking on is exploring. Next slide, please. So just to kind of go over the outline, kind of run a show today. After I wrap up this intro, I'm going to pass this off to E3, whom we hired to conduct the study. They're going to be showing the initial findings and key assumptions and inputs that go into their modeling. I'll come back and wrap before we go to breakouts, kind of give you a timeline, next steps for the study. And then we'll go to breakouts to start to receive your stakeholder input and feedback. Right now, Malia is about to put up a poll that's going to help put you in the right breakout rooms. And the way we're doing this today is we're basically going to have two kinds of breakout rooms, touching on those goals. If you want to talk about kind of the current state of storage, select one of those two breakout rooms. If you want to talk about the future role, reliability, mid and long duration storage, select one of those two breakout rooms. Again, 2 breakout rooms per topic. I just want to keep emphasizing this is just the start of your engagement with us. This is not the end. So, you know, if you don't get a chance to share your feedback in the breakout rooms, you know, we look forward to connecting with you on that in the future. Yeah, excited for that. The format for today during the presentation, please put your questions and comments in Zoom's Q&A feature. During the presentation, please keep yourself muted. Your feedback during the presentation in the Q&A feature. The questions that the DOER, CEC, and E3 teams are able to answer in the chat box, we will do that. Other questions we'll defer to breakouts or to follow on meetings with you. I want to encourage everyone, and I'll say this again later, please submit also your feedback and written comments to DOER, and you can submit those right to me. My email address is right there. And this presentation and a recording of it will be made available on the study's website. Next slide. And with that, I will kick it over to E3.
Great, thanks, Tom. So good morning, everyone. I'm Andrew D. Benedictus, director at E3, and I'll be walking us through the next couple bullets here and then passing off to my colleague, Liz. I just want to say out front, we're super excited to be here this morning talking to all of you, starting this this feedback process that Tom talked about, and very excited to be working with Tom and the rest of the state team on this exciting study. Before launching into details about the study itself, I do want to provide just a little bit of an introduction to E3 for those of us who don't know us well. So we are an energy consulting firm of over 100 full-time consultants, spread across 4 offices, starting out in San Francisco and also now in New York, Calgary, and right here in Boston. Our East Coast offices, Boston included, are a little bit newer. Been around since 2018 out here, but we bring, overall 30 years of experience. And we highlight in the bottom right of this slide here some of that experience that we think is, especially relevant to this work that we're doing here now, both in terms of understanding the context of this, right? So understanding just what does the clean energy future of New England look like through, our main renewable energy goals market assessment and our net zero New England studies. And then, more sort of technology or subject specific, we've done a lot of work on the current and future value of storage. Some of that in places where, similar to here, there's a cold climate sort of winter peaking question that we'll get to in a bit, right? So we've done that sort of work in New York and Minnesota, and then also a lot of long duration storage work, trying to understand the future there out in California. I'll also mention that we have done work for a number of energy storage owners, developers, investors, and we can't talk about that publicly. We can't name names, but we'll be bringing that experience also to this project. That gives us a lot of good background to work from. So in terms of the project team, you've met me briefly. So I'm the E3 project manager for this study. And a little bit later, we'll switch things over to my colleague Liz Metatel, who's the project lead today, or for this project. And then in the breakout rooms, folks may, depending on what room you're in, also run into Kush Patel and Nate Grady, highlighted here. I'll mention we also have a number of other E3ers on the call and working on this project. So you'll see several of us out there. On the state side, just to highlight sort of key folks there, we've already heard from Tom today in the intro, and alongside Tom in the breakout rooms today, some people will see Corinne Moss and Joanna Troy. And then also I want to point out on the Mass CEC side, Reese Sweeney Taylor, who's the PM on that side, but we won't see him today since he's out enjoying some parental leave time. Okay, so going back to contextualize this work, I'm going to go back to the CECP for a minute, and Tom has already said a lot of this, so I won't dwell on this slide too much, but I want to note that we're really taking the CECP as our starting point here. And so specifically, we're using the CECP phased scenario as our outlook for what capacity expansion, what load looks like in New England going forward. And as Tom pointed out, there's, in order to decarbonize, a lot of electrification that needs to happen in the transportation sectors and in the building sector. And what that means is a lot of new electric load. And, in order to decarbonize, we're going to meet that electric load with a huge build out of renewable energy. So you can see in the plot on the right here, that 2050 build for the phase scenario has a huge amount of new solar coming online, and then wind also, both offshore and land-based. Alongside that big renewables build out, we have 22 gigawatts of energy storage coming on by 2050 also. So I think based on that, certainly we need to get a hold on where we're headed, what are the challenges, get out in front of any problem of this sort of deployment at mass scale like this. And I'll point out, we're basing this on the phased scenario, but looking across all of the CECP scenarios, we still see similar levels of storage build out. So across the scenarios, between 22 and 28 gigawatts needed by 2050. So this isn't a, this choice of, needing to study storage is not specific to choosing the phase scenario. Any of these decarbonization scenarios, require a great amount of storage. This is a real, no regrets piece of investigation here. As Tom mentioned, there are a lot of uses for storage and reasons that we need this amount. I'm going to talk about it briefly on 3 different timescales here. There's the sort of hourly and sub-hourly ramping, right? So balancing the intermittency of renewable generation and the volatility of load. Going a little bit broader, you can think within a single day, intraday shifting of load and generation. So there you can think about the fact that we basically get to use storage as illustrated in that picture that Tom showed to move generation from when we've got high renewable output, for example, during the solar peak during the day, to when we've got high load, right? So when people are either coming home, turning on appliances, turning on lights, or in the winter times, also we see a bit of a dual peak in the mornings when people are heating their homes up for the day. And then zooming out to even a longer time scale, and this is one that we'll get to as we really think about the future of energy storage in Massachusetts, is this intraday shifting and really even like seasonal shifting of renewable generation. The idea here being that we want to be able to take energy when it's plentiful, avoid curtailment, and then be able to hold on to that and dispatch it when the grid really needs it in periods, which we see coming in the winter during sort of cold, dark weeks, right? Not a lot of sun shining, potentially not a lot of wind blowing, but still high loads due to heating needs, especially. So across, multiple time scales, we see this need for storage and ways that it can fill in, ways that different technologies will slot in. So understanding the need, we can kind of go back into the study itself and think about the key tasks here. And we've got 3 broad questions that are really guiding this study and that we'll touch on across the next few sections of this presentation today. First is just where are we at now, right? What is the current state of storage in the Commonwealth? How much is deployed? What programs are out there encouraging deployment? And under those programs, what does the benefit cost picture look like, right? Are we getting kind of good use cases for storage today? Second, starting to look to the future a bit. We want to understand what the market outlook is for emerging storage technologies, mid and long duration specifically. Right, these are a lot of fairly new technologies, so we want to understand what is the level of maturity, how do we think their costs will evolve, getting that picture, and third, and for these mid and long duration technologies, what are the applications of them down the road? How will they contribute to reliability in our highly decarbonized system? And also potentially at the distribution level as well, how can they contribute? So this is, just our first session today. We'll kind of do an overview of these, but obviously there's going to be a lot more than we can say in this section and in our second session later at the end of the summer. So this will culminate in a study public report, and that will have all our analysis, a summary of feedback that we're hearing from folks today and throughout the process, and our key findings and policy recommendations. So that's the overview of what we're looking at in the study as a whole, and I think we can now jump into that first piece, which is what are we looking at today in terms of energy storage. So today, we do have a storage goal in the state of Massachusetts set by the Energy Storage Initiative. Target is a 1,000 megawatt hour target, and that's by the end of 2025. And to help get towards this target, the Energy Storage Initiative created the ACES program, or Advancing Commonwealth Energy Storage. And it's a program that is out there fund pilot and demonstration projects for a number of different use cases, a number of different technologies. And you can see on the right-hand side of the slide a map of those ACES installations today. Alongside that, that funding program, there are 3 incentive programs that we want to highlight that storage can participate in the state. The first one here, and I'll note these programs are largely stackable also, so we're not limited to participation in just one of them. The first one list here is the Connected Solutions Program. This is sort of a traditional demand response program, so folks can participate and basically during peak calls, storage as a resource can actually provide generation and not just load reduction there, and receives an incentive based on performance during those peak calls. The Clean Peak program is set up to incentivize renewable generation during peak periods, which are sort of predefined and change by season of the year. And so that is set to encourage renewable generation during those peak periods, but storage can participate in this program if it meets the criterion of charging on renewable energy before discharging during those peak periods. And there's a set of rules that kind of establishes how how storage can actually satisfy that criterion of basically proving that they're charging on renewables. And finally, we'll point out the SMART program, which is primarily a solar incentive program. Right, so this is $1 per kilowatt hour adder, basically, for any solar generation, but there is an energy storage adder available in that program. So if we've got a solar system that's paired with storage of an appropriate size, so again, rules around qualifying for that. But if so, then there's a bump to that per kilowatt hour incentive that folks get. So that's sort of the picture of what's out there today, pushing deployment along. I do want to highlight while we're on this slide, the red box at the bottom here, where we're calling out a stakeholder question. You'll see boxes like this sprinkled throughout the presentation today. These are places where we are especially excited to get stakeholder feedback. So here, right, wanting to understand what are the barriers that you all are seeing that are unaddressed by current programs, what opportunities are out there that we haven't taken advantage of yet. Of course, we want and welcome feedback on anything today, but we've highlighted these specific prompts to hopefully get the gears really turning. So given all of these efforts that are out there to encourage deployment, the next thing to look at is just where we're at today, what's out there currently. So we pulled together a bunch of publicly sourced data. This is from ACE's data, from Velocity Suite, and utility data from both the electric distribution companies and the municipal light plants. And we've gathered together a combined list from all of those of the storage projects that are out there today in the state. I'll note up front the majority of the storage that's out there in Massachusetts in terms of capacity are from these pumped hydro facilities that were built in the 1970s. These are out in the western part of the state and have a combined capacity of almost 2 gigawatts and a duration around 7 hours on average. So, cutting those out of the picture, since those don't get to count towards our 1,000 megawatt hour target, looking at the rest of what we have in the state, we've got another almost 300 megawatts. And most of that is, small installations, front of meter, lithium ion, and a large number of them are co-located with solar and participating in that SMART program that we referenced on the last slide. I'll also note, in terms of thinking about, getting towards the goal the next few years, that the interconnection queue has a whole lot of storage projects in there. We haven't shown the data on that here today, largely because the interconnection queue is a very uncertain thing. So we don't want to, lean on that too much as fact or future prediction. But in the queue, we see a similar geographic sort of development focus, right? So similar places where projects are being proposed. But a bit of a slant towards larger projects. So, I think that that's possible that plays out for the next few years, so we start to see slightly larger installations. But again, the queue has a historically, I think, around like a 20% completion rate, so we're not going to bank too heavily on the things that we see in there. So understanding the storage that's out there today, sort of why we have what we have, and possibly also supplementary question of what aren't we getting, and why aren't we getting it. To figure that out, the next question is just what is the business case today? And so to look at that, we have a few use cases, some of which we'll present today, many of which we will present in future, the second stakeholder session and in the report later. And in these business cases, we're building up the basically the value streams that storage projects can access. So you see here, and I won't read through in detail out all of these, but we've got value streams at various levels here: retail, T&D, and wholesale level. And of course, the access that a deployment has to get any of these value streams depends on the configuration of that deployment. For example, if you're looking at a front of the meter installation, and it doesn't have access to any of the retail rate arbitrage or demand reduction, et cetera. In addition to being able to only access certain value streams, depending on setup, we'll also note that some of these value streams are non-monetizable, or on top of that, even just hard to quantify. So that's our sort of gray versus blue coding that we see here. Values in blue are ones that we think are more easily monetized and that we will be estimating quantitatively in the business cases that we build up. The gray ones are ones that we will discuss qualitatively, but don't think we have a good road to talking about quantitatively. That being said, we call out another question on the bottom of this slide. We want to hear from all of you. What value streams are the ones that you're most interested in? Are there any that we aren't considering that ought to be on here? And are there any in this qualitative bucket that that folks think should be quantized? All right. So in order to calculate our benefits there, we've built a fairly simple dispatch model. And this model takes as its inputs, and I won't go through this in much detail, but it takes as its inputs the things that we see on the left side of the screen here. So things like market prices, the program revenues that we talked about earlier. And in the case of behind the meter, we want to look at load shapes and retail rates as well. And depending on what sort of installation this is, our dispatch algorithm runs. Depending on if this is front of meter, it'll maximize towards certain things, behind the meter others, and then that gives us a dispatch profile. That profile then tells us what revenues we have coming out of this. So that can give us revenues from ancillary services, wholesale energy, bill reductions through energy or demand charges, and then also things like capacity revenue, avoided T&D. So we then roll all that up and put it into our cost tests, where we're looking at both the point of view from the developer perspective, right, the storage owner, but then also the state perspective, the sort of societal type of view. So that's basically the benefit side of things. Obviously, the other huge piece of this is the cost side, and the largest piece of the cost just being the capital costs. So for capital costs, we have built up a storage pro forma using public data, and we present some of the results from that here. So we're starting from present day costs coming out of Lazard, and we make the choice to hold those present day costs steady until 2026. The idea there being that right now we're still having some sort of imbalance between demand and global supply chain. So giving the market a few years to basically catch up, reach a bit better of an equilibrium there, and then allowing our cost declines to hit. When they do, we're using the NREL ATB cost trajectories for our declines, and then on top of that, putting the IRA tax credits, which are obviously a big piece here. So those tax credits are 30% through 2045. And that 30% basically assumes that we're hitting the prevailing wage requirement but not any of the other bonuses available. So that, that number can change. There are other bonuses out there for, depending on where materials and whatnot are sourced from, depending on the community where it's installed, et cetera. So, that 30% could be a different number in reality, but that's what we're assuming here. And that we assume phases out starting in 2045, based on, so the way that the IRA credit works is basically once the US hits 75% below 2022 emissions, then we start to see a phase out of these credits. And based on various state goals throughout the country, we think 2045 is sort of a reasonable guess for when that'll happen. But obviously we'll see as that actually comes. So, costs definitely a big piece of the equation here. And so again, eager to hear reactions to this, whether or not these are consistent with folks' expectations and experience. I'll note very briefly, we try to source all of our other key inputs here on public data sources. I'm not going to linger on this slide, but folks can take a look at it later once these slides are shared. But I will point out just while we're sitting here for a moment that, another key piece are the energy capacity prices. And we're getting all of those from the AESC. So an easy to point to source there that folks are hopefully familiar with. So rolling up all of these costs and benefits together, we are able to build a few use cases. So we're going to present two very quickly today. I want to stress up front, these are draft model outputs, right? So nothing finalized here. And we're definitely looking for feedback on these. And absolutely we'll be showing more use cases than just a couple that we're presenting here today. But we wanted to get some numbers, some of these use cases out in front of folks now to basically get reactions, give people something to respond to. So this is a 1 megawatt battery, 4-hour duration, lithium ion installed at a CNI site, connected to the distribution system. And on the left here, we're looking at just the participant view, so developer perspective, basically levelized out over the project lifetime. And on the right side, we're showing the 20-year view of how these costs and benefits are actually playing out annually. This particular installation that we're looking at here, this particular use case is for a standalone battery, so not paired with solar, and is participating in the Clean Peak program. But obviously not being paired with solar, not able to participate in SMART, which, as we said before, several of our real systems out there today are participating in. I think, I'm drawn to a couple things in these figures. The first being just that, present day costs are pretty high and a bit of a barrier. We see, wholesale and Clean Peak payments climbing throughout the lifetime, but still not overcoming that initial high capital cost. The other thing on the benefit side, definitely worth pointing at, is our ancillary services, which are high in the very first years, but dry up pretty quickly. And our thought there is that we're going to see a lot of storage coming into the market. And so those ancillary prices, which can give a bit of a benefit right now, are not a long-term price stream. Those will dry up quickly as the market saturates with energy storage. So that's sort of the present day view for that type of installation. We can jump now to our 2030 view. And here the biggest thing to note, I guess first of all, is that we're in the money, right? We're getting net benefits now. And if we kind of flip back and forth, we can see that the costs have dramatically reduced, right? So we're getting our credit from the IRA, we're getting our learning, and that's really helping us out here. And ultimately kind of what puts us over the edge. So that's our draft output that we've got right now. And again, we'll be sharing many more use cases at the next session and in the report. So we want to hear from folks, first off, does this one that we've presented today make sense, but also what other use cases are folks interested in seeing? We've got our own starting list, but obviously want to make sure that that's a group sourced list. So just to wrap this question before I pass things over to wrap this section before I pass things over to Liz, we see today that we've got about 300 megawatts towards this 1,000 megawatt hour goal. So it's about 600 megawatt hours towards that goal. That excludes pumped hydro. A lot of that is front of meter. A decent amount of that is co-located with solar and participated in smart. And there's a lot in the queue, but the queue is pretty uncertain. In terms of the use case that we showed, and looking at the front of meter sources that aren't paired with solar, we see that they struggle to recover costs today. The biggest piece there being high capital costs, and then the short-lived nature of ancillary service revenues. However, looking forward to 2030, we think that we will see projects making money then, mostly due to our lower capital costs and increasing energy and capacity revenues. There is some right, so this is an hourly model that we talked through, so it's possible that the volatility of real-time markets also will provide more opportunity for arbitrage and more revenue that way. And I think also, right, this was all looking at front of the meter. When we look at behind the meter projects, we will have the advantage of being able to mitigate bill impacts, which should give higher benefits also. So we look forward to looking into all those pieces. Also noting here, there's a lot of uncertainty in these revenue streams, right? We sort of make our best forecasts, but we know that this uncertainty does deter investment today. And other things, citing difficulties, safety concerns, right? There are challenges out there aside from this pure economics picture that create barriers to deployment, today and in the future. And so that's another piece that we absolutely want to hear about from folks. What uncertainties, what barriers are folks seeing or worrying about in the future? All right. So with that, I will pass things on to Liz to talk about the future view.
Great. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
So thanks, Andrew and Tom and the rest of the state team. We can jump ahead to the next slide, where we're going to talk through mid and long duration storage and our approach to this early stage modeling. So we want to start with a little bit of motivation, around what the application of long duration storage is likely to be in New England. So the second set of questions in this study, focus on its ability to support the needs of the electric grid in 2050. So just a note on definitions, I'll rely on the definitions from the 2022 Climate Act, which defined mid-duration storage as storage with rated power between 4 and 10 hours, and long-duration storage being greater than 10 hours in dispatch duration. So when we talk about longer duration storage supporting the electric grid of 2050, what we're referring to is the ability of long duration storage to support a power grid that's aligned with the CECP 2050, which is, Massachusetts' plan for economy-wide net zero. So, this is looking at a power sector that's very different from today's. It's, one in which there is a 93% emissions reduction relative to 1990. And, of course, it supports significant electrification of buildings and transportation and has high levels of renewable energy. So in that CECP 2050, short and mid duration storage are built to minimize curtailment and shift intermittent renewable generation from the middle of the day to times of peak demand, particularly, that late afternoon and evening time period. And we can see that when we simulate these portfolios, on the lower left here, we're showing kind of that typical week in 2050, and we see exactly that role for short duration storage. So in these graphs, the kind of black line is the load from those portfolios, and the different colors are simulated dispatch from the different resources, largely renewable resources within those New England portfolios. And again, we see, excess renewable output in the middle of the day by mid-century can be used to charge short duration storage and dispatch it into the evening, providing, a lot of value there. But if we look at the right, this is what we call kind of a critical week, or a week where it's challenging to meet all of the demand. This is from January, a simulated January 2050. And here what we're seeing is, relative to the left, there is less excess renewable generation to charge storage, and loads are a lot higher. So the system is really leveraging, all of both short and long duration storage from the CECP portfolios and charging from, as much solar and wind as possible. And that really limits, the amount of, the lack of excess renewables really limits sort of that ability to use storage beyond, what is available here, which is still, twice as much storage dispatching in those critical weeks in the winter than what we have in the summer. And I think, these critical weeks illustrate what we think of as kind of the key potential role for long duration storage, and more broadly, the kind of key reliability challenge for the region, which is, ensuring that we have a sufficient, the reliability challenge piece is really ensuring there is sufficient renewable generation during these multi-day stretches. Here you can see January 24th, I think, to the 26th, where you have the combination of high load and low renewable output. And so it's in these sets of circumstances where you need some sort of dispatchable resource for the system to avoid loss of load. And in a low carbon future, that has to be either some sort of zero carbon resource or long duration storage. And this is where long duration storage really has the potential to support the New England grid. And so that's going to be the motivation for one of the kind of key applications that we are considering for mid and long duration storage in Massachusetts. And so that, that's kind of some of that motivation. Andrew, do you want to go to the next slide? So we have kind of two parallel tasks as part of our study and support for the state. Now that we've motivated, I think, what the key application is for longer duration storage, we could sort of step back and say, what are the range of potential technologies that could serve that need? And then we'll second look at kind of what the ability is of different generic resources with similar characteristics to some of the emerging techs to actually provide effective capacity. So to that first part, we are kicking off, and we certainly are looking for feedback here, an assessment of the range of potential emerging technologies, their performance characteristics, costs, siting considerations, and the potential for these different emerging technologies to actually be deployed and support the state of Massachusetts. So this is just a high-level characterization of the in-progress full assessment. So for now, what we're sharing is kind of the generic list of technologies, and what we're looking for from stakeholders is support, in informing around specific projects and technologies that are happening and ongoing in the state, or that we think have potential in the state. I'll say, broadly speaking, mid and long duration storage technologies, like the ones, the generic ones listed in this table, really vary widely in terms of, technical and commercial readiness, and also operational characteristics in terms of duration, round trip efficiency, as well as their costs. And they have different constraints or uncertainties around their deployment. So just broadly speaking, how we've organized them here is consistent with how the original State of Charge report had considered them. just in terms of mechanical storage, converting mechanical energy or force to generate compression. There's a whole bunch of technologies that would fit into this category. Of course, pumped hydro is going to be, where there's the largest share in the US of storage capacity, but we're not aware at this stage of any potential for new pumped hydro in Massachusetts, which is why it's grayed out here. And we've also grayed out technologies where they would require sort of things like significant underground storage. We're working with input from many folks on this call to kind of fill in and rule in or rule out other technologies on this list, whether they be that mechanical or thermal storage, storing heat energy, or electrochemical, like many of the batteries technologies. I did want to note that there are other technologies that fall under the umbrella of long duration storage and mid and long duration storage. And in particular, power to gas technologies or hydrogen is not being considered in detail as part of this report, but I did want to acknowledge that it may be very important to the Commonwealth, that or other kind of electrolytic fuels. So it will be discussed qualitatively in this report, but is not the focus of this particular assessment. I also did want to note that in the reliability assessment, which I'll discuss next, we will use at least 2 generic technology agnostic storage resources that are going to represent sort of roughly the range of durations. So something that has a relatively shorter long duration of between 10 and 20 hours. And then we'll also look at resources that have those really long durations, like 100+ hours, and model a generic resource, generic assumptions around round trip efficiency that are roughly aligned with some of the technologies being deployed through early stage projects today. And then just to reiterate the question or the stakeholder point at the bottom, we're looking for feedback on which specific technologies you want to make sure are included in the assessment as we sort of kick this off and dig into this summer. And we would encourage you to also email Tom to be involved in some of the group interviews that we have coming up, where we're going to dive deeper into some of the specific technology characterizations and assumptions that we're using in our assessment of that. So with that, Andrew, I will shift to discussing how we actually are going to model the potential for long duration storage to contribute to reliability in Massachusetts and the region. Great. So as we said up front, we recognize that one of the key applications for long duration storage is in providing effective capacity to the region. So E3 is leveraging our loss of load probability model, RECAP, to assess the ability of mid and long duration storage to contribute effective capacity to a 2050 New England electric grid. This model is designed to evaluate resource adequacy of electric power systems. It's been used in jurisdictions across North America, and it's well suited based on its chronological nature to evaluate systems with high penetrations of renewable energy and storage. In particular, just to kind of elaborate a bit on how this actually works, we use time sequential simulations of hundreds of years of plausible weather and outage conditions to estimate statistically significant measures of system reliability, so a loss of load probability. And we can also look at the ability of individual resources like long duration storage to support resource adequacy. So the modeling framework captures, and this is kind of illustrated in the left-hand panel, it's going to simulate 8760 or hourly dispatch of the system under different realizations of historical weather, and it will do this many times. It will both look at the load side of the equation as well as correlations So for given weather conditions, what is the likely load as well as the likely output from wind and solar resources. And then, what we can do is use that to both characterize, first the reliability challenge over time. So, as we move, say, from 2030 to 2040 to 2050, where are the periods where we're most likely to see resource insufficiency or, the ability of resources to not meet the potential that they cannot meet all of our load. So we can look at, when those loss of load conditions are most likely to arise. And we can also look at the ability of specific resources, in particular for this study, looking at mid and long duration storage to provide effective capacity. So to provide capacity throughout the year, but basically to be able to replace what you would call sort of perfect capacity, or a unit that was available, a theoretical unit available all the time at full capacity. And I'll just note that our approach for this task is largely based on a New England-wide model using the New England-wide portfolios from the CECP 2050, just given sort of the integrated nature of the grid and reliability planning. Andrew, you want to go to the next slide? So just to build a little bit on my last point there around what we're using as our assumptions within the model, we are primarily relying on the CECP 2050 portfolios. So you can get those from the Massachusetts website. So if you're curious to sort of understand all of the assumptions underlying that existing analysis. So we're leveraging the state's phased scenario. And that in particular, we'll use both the loads side of the equation. So we can see, total loads, as Tom mentioned, grow 2.5 times by 2050, driven by electrification of buildings and transportation. And we can see that, the system transitions relatively, transitions over time to being winter peaking. So, here we can see it goes, grows from about 33 gigawatts in 2030, and then transitions to about 44 gigawatt winter peak by 2040, and then 55 gigawatts by 2050. So, this is a strongly winter peaking system by 2050. And then on the resource side, the portfolios that we'll model, as you can see from this figure on the right, these are the state's existing planning portfolios. They are, rely predominantly on large additions of offshore wind, onshore wind, and solar to support load growth. And then the portfolios do maintain some firm capacity, which is important for reliability purposes. And in our study, we'll be able to look at the ability of long duration storage. If you were to remove some of that firm capacity, how much long duration storage do you need to add to the system to restore the system to the same level of reliability? So in this case, moving the system back to a 1 in 10 or 1 day in 10 years loss of load probability. So you can go to the next slide. So this is just a quick note I wanted to comment here about kind of why we're moving from a production simulation, which would basically, dispatch the system over, a single weather year or a couple of weather year conditions, to a loss of load probability model. What we're doing here is basically that same dispatch, 8760 dispatch, but we're going to run it over many weather years, in this case 39 weather years, and we'll actually do a Monte Carlo simulation that draws hundreds of weather years from this previous 39 years, so actually building simulated future years. But essentially what we'll be doing is pulling from a much larger range of potential weather conditions to be able to develop a more robust assessment of the probability of, or the potential for these sort of low probability events, which, outage events are certainly a low probability event. So just to give you some sense of how this extends the weather data. So in 2011, which was really an intermediate year, so very appropriate for doing the capacity expansion. What we can see is that if you took the 2050 kind of energy service demands and simulated those same demands, so loads under different weather conditions, you might end up with a peak in a particularly warm year of around 46 gigawatts, and then in the coldest year of something, almost 60 gigawatts. And so we'll be simulating the system under this broader range of conditions. And then in the bottom, this is just an illustrative metric that's sort of correlated with resource insufficiency. So what we pulled here is just, how do the underlying kind of multi-day stretches of cold temperatures, here shown for any population center in New England, but, how do these multi-day stretches of cold temperatures, which are going to sort of be correlated with loss of load, how do those vary across weather years? And we can see, in 2011, there were cold snaps of 3 consecutive days in any population center where the temperature stayed below 20 degrees Fahrenheit, which is slightly shorter than the average year, which, had in at least one population center a 5-day streak. And so, these are just going to give you some sense of, when you might see resource insufficiency, which may be more likely in some of these more challenging years where, when you have particularly cold years, you're going to see, periods of extended high loads, and there is a greater potential to run out of renewable generation in these periods. We can go to the next slide. So I wanted to summarize, that this is the early stages of ongoing work that's going to occur throughout this summer. And we are, kind of coming in with the understanding that a key application for mid and especially long duration energy storage will be to support the reliability in the future under a high renewable future through interday and through interday load shifting. Of course, there are many candidate long duration storage technologies which have different operational characteristics, but we are not modeling a winner or a preferred technology among those. And our work is ongoing to do a few different tasks related to assessing the reliability of the reliability contributions for mid and long duration storage. We are characterizing winter reliability in 2030, 2040, and 2050 under the state's 2050 CACP phased scenarios. We will do this under at least 2 contingencies, and we would like your feedback here. So, how does that reliability challenge look different if you have loss of specific transmission lines or access to offshore wind? We also, welcome stakeholder input to assess which contingencies are of greatest interest. We will then be, also doing reliability modeling that, as I said, evaluates the ability of these resources, mid and long storage resources, to contribute effective capacity. This will include an assessment of its ability to replace some of the firm dispatchable generation that's currently assumed in those portfolios. It will also include an assessment of the potential diversity benefits from pairing storage with offshore wind. How does sort of complementarities between those resources help improve system reliability or contribute to system reliability? And so we welcome your input on, the types of assumptions and scenarios that we're using for this assessment and the contingencies that we model. So with that, I will pass the mic back to Tom.
Thanks so much, Liz and Andrew. Next slide, please. So just to close this out before we go to breakout rooms, want to give you a sense of the timeline and kind of next steps here. So the study kicked off the very end of March with E3. We're in the midst of our first stakeholder session with you all right now. Stakeholder interviews are ongoing, and they're really going to kick into high gear after this session. So, please reach out. We'll be reaching out to you as well. Very excited to have interviews and conversations with you about all of the topics, and all these questions we've been getting in the chat are really awesome. So, lots to talk about. E3 is requesting feedback specifically with regard to kind of their modeling that they've kind of shown you today within the next 2 weeks on June 21st. The second stakeholder session is going to be August 16th, the same time at 9:30 Eastern. This one here I want to really flag for you all because summer flies by fast, but we're looking for final feedback from stakeholders to inform the study by September 1st, so 2 weeks after that second stakeholder session. So you start working on those comments now. By no means we won't reject comments that come in after September 1st, but if you're able to get it in by September 1st, we'll be able to kind of fully review and consider your comments for the study, whereas after that, we may not be able to. E3's results will be delivered to Mass CEC and DOER a month after that by October 1st. And then the DOER report, which includes the final study results, will be delivered to the legislature per statute by December 31st, 2023. And then we will be accepting public comment on that report. We haven't worked out exactly when we'll want your comments due by, but it'll be sometime in early 2024. So stay tuned for that. Next slide. So we're about to go into breakout rooms, and it looks like we'll have about 20, maybe a little more than that to discuss, have these initial reactions and discussion with you all. But just going forward, again, this is just the start of engagement with you. It's super critical to the outcomes of the study and potential policy recommendations or programmatic recommendations we make that we have robust engagement with you. I have a few links to the registration for the next session. Please submit your written comments. You can submit them to me. The web page for the study is shown there. And again, a recording of today's session will be made available and posted to the study's websites. Next slide. So just very quickly, how this breakout session is going to work. We're going to have 4 different breakout rooms, again, 2 for the kind of current state of storage and 2 for the future role of storage, looking at the reliability and mid-long duration storage. Each breakout room is going to have at least one E3 representative who will be like the lead moderator, and at least one DOR and CEC representative who will be a co-moderator. Representatives are going to put up a slide to help with the kind of guiding questions, to kind of help guide discussion. But certainly we're also open to kind of some of the questions that came up during the chat, or just like other comments that you may have as well. And again, this is just we may have a lot of people in breakout rooms. So first, if you don't have a chance to kind of share your feedback, please reach out to us. We look forward to speaking with you going forward. We do ask that in breakouts, you do raise your hand, use the raise your hand feature, and a moderator will call on you to unmute and speak. We're not going to reconvene to the main room. So next slide. With that, I just want to thank everybody. I'm fairly new to DOER. I think it's been about 4 months. I've met a few of you, but given the number on this chat, there's like a lot more of you for me to meet, and I'm really excited to get your perspective, to start engaging with you on a personal level, and we're all excited to engage with you as well. And we look forward to start to hear your feedback in breakout rooms. So with that, Malia, please send us away. And thanks for joining us this morning.